everyone. Welcome back to the Creatively Thinking podcast. Join Carolyn Botello as she uncovers the inspirations behind some incredibly creative minds that are orbiting our local communities. Hi, David Brown. How are you? I found you on Facebook, so therefore we have never actually met. I was intrigued by your work in encaustics, as well as your experience being faculty at OCAD, Ontario College of Art and Design University. There's so much to unpack there, but let's get started. And first off, I like to ask artists, what made them choose this path? Was it working with your hands, your emotional insights, or something else?
Hey, Carolyn, thanks for having me here today. So growing up, I knew that art was going to be a big part of my life, mostly because it was the thing that I was always the best at. My mother was an artist and an art teacher in high school, and my grandmother was a talented painter, and she was a graduate from OCAD, or OCA it was called, when she went there and when I went there. So I was always surrounded by people making art, and I have really fond memories of when I was a little kid and going to the church down the street for art classes, and rainy days at our family cottage. I would sort of be sat down with a giant pad of paper and just try and fill the whole page with little doodles and cartoons and stuff like that. And then by the time I got to high school, again, it was always the course that I was best at. And in grade 9, I had a really good art teacher, and he said to me, "Wow, you should think about going to OCA when you graduate high school." And that was long before I sort of started thinking about university or anything. But he planted that seed, and by the time I got to grade 13 and we were picking where we wanted to do, it seemed like a good place to apply for. And I went down. I lived in Unionville, which is north of the city. At that point, it was more like a small town. It's been swallowed up by the city now. But I went downtown to OCAD, had my interview. It went really well, and I got to go to the Ontario College of Art. So it just all kind of lined up, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, it did all work out for you there, didn't it?
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, wait a minute, there may be some listeners out there that are like, grade 13, what's that?
Yeah. That's how old I am. So
I know. Right?
In Ontario, high school used to go to grade 13. Then they changed grade 13. They didn't call it 13 anymore, but they had a 13th year called OAC.
Yeah, that's what I remember it as. Yeah.
Yeah. We're gonna get things confused with OAC, OCA.
Yeah.
But they changed that, and then by the time a year or two after I left high school, they completely dropped the 13th year, and they just go to grade 12 now. So
yeah,
that's what the story is there. But I think, gosh, so our son, he's 19 now, and he's just in his second year at university now. But they're so young going to university. I felt really bad for all these kids. They're making these huge decisions, what they want to do for the rest of their life and what they're trying to study, and they're just so young.
I know, they're such kids.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, smarter people than me have made those decisions, but in my experience, I was glad to have that extra year of high school for sure.
Oh, I know. I think they should totally bring that back. So it's a year for kids to, figure things out and stuff, not just rush off.
A lot of our son's friends ended up doing sort of a victory lap, an extra year.
Yeah.
I think that's great, because it gives them a year to really think about things. They can maybe get a little bit of a job and get some life experience and see what they actually like doing in life. I don't think there's any reason not to do that, really.
Yeah, it makes sense. Anyway, we're getting off topic.
Yeah.
Can you share with our audience, in a condensed version, of course, how your creative practice evolved to this point? Were you always interested in building artwork in 3D, or did you start somewhere else visually? I guess you kind of answered that, but maybe just go into that a bit more.
Yeah. Well, when I was at OCAD, I was studying more in the design field. I had a very broad education at OCA, but my diploma was a double major in graphic design and industrial design. So when I first graduated, I was actually a practicing designer. But I always made art as a way to sort of fuel my creative side, and it informed the design work that I was doing. And I made more and more art along the way. And then around the time our son was born, I switched from sort of designing full time to painting full time. And at that time, I was doing more collage based work that was probably more derived from my design and typography. There was a lot of typography and found images and found bits and pieces, and I was collaging them all together. And in doing collage, I started using wax as a kind of a glue, and then wax as a cover. And then somebody suggested, hey, you could put some color in that wax. It might be a really interesting thing. And so then I went down the rabbit hole of learning about how to color wax, and lo and behold, they call that encaustic painting. And at this time, encaustic wasn't nearly as popular as there wasn't nearly as many people doing it. And it was like there was one book on encaustic painting, and there was very, very little information. But I was able to learn enough to teach myself how to do it, and became really intrigued with the encaustic process, and that really sent me down this sort of painting path and doing different kind of abstract paintings and abstracted landscapes and whatnot. And then recently, well, in the first year of the pandemic, when everything was shut down, we're all huddling at home. I took an online course with a young photographer from Toronto named Jessica Thulman, she's incredible. She's very young, but she's an incredible lecturer. She just did a master's of architecture, I think, but she's mainly a photographer. Anyway, she was giving some online courses at the time, which was a great way to pass the time. And in her work, she does really interesting things with her photographs, where she folds and pleats and does really neat three-dimensional things to the prints. And she was encouraging us to try that with our photos. And it occurred to me, wow, I have been making these encaustic monotypes, and I wonder if I could fold them. And that then just opened up this whole new world of making my work, in 3D. Often when you're making two-dimensional work, you're sort of faking 3 dimensions. You're drawing shadows, and you're making things have the illusion of 3 dimensions, but adding the actual real third dimension really spoke to me. I guess it's because of my background in industrial design, and I like to build things and that sort of stuff. So it's really resonated with me. So I guess that's about 3 years now since, because it was 2020. I've been really experimenting and pushing 3-dimensional work, sort of wall hung sculptures, all incorporating my encaustic monotypes and my encaustic paintings. And that's really dominated a great deal of my practice. I still have been doing some of the 2-dimensional work, but the 3D stuff is what I've been most interested in, and the galleries that I work with have been very excited about it too. So that's really dominated my time. So that's how I got to be where I am now. Probably, and that's what you saw initially was the 3D stuff. That's why I mentioned that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you were talking about 3D. It just made me think of a 3D teacher I had at OCAD, and he asked all the students to think of something that wasn't 3D, and everybody would say, well, like paper, and he says, nope, it's still 3D. So really, technically, pretty much everything is 3D. So
yeah,
I mean, but it's not really 3D, right? So when you said that about 3D, I just got me thinking about that teacher.
Isn't that great? We have all these lovely memories of our time at art school and stuff. And there's things that are really ingrained, and probably that teacher had no idea that thing would leave such an impression on you, right?
Yeah, well, because no, it surprised the whole class that
Yeah.
nobody could come up with something that really wasn't 3D, and I think it probably stuck in a lot of people's memory. It was like,
Yeah.
oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're in a three-dimensional world, so everything is three-dimensional in some way, even if one of the dimensions is very, 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 very thin.
How has your time as an OCAD professor impacted your career as an encaustic painter? Would you say teaching has opened your practice to new ideas, or did you see it as a way to enhance your CV?
Well, it was more of so my time at OCAD as a student was, and it sounds like a cliche, everybody always says it, but my time at college was just so special. It really was sort of the best time of my life, and it was the first time when I really realized, oh, I belong here,
I can do this. Yeah. This is where I should
Yeah,
be.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I was never a great student, particularly in junior school and stuff. I didn't do well at all. I really, really struggled in school, and I tried really hard in high school. I got pretty decent marks, but when I got to OCA, it was just like, wow, I'm really good at this, and these people are like me, and this. It was like the doors to the world had just opened up for me. And on top of that, it was such a magical place where you could just run around and learn anything you want. I was in the wood shop, the metal shop, the plastic shop, the print, the printing department. I was everywhere in that school, just like a sponge, sucking up everything that I could. So it was such a great, great time for me. A few years after graduating, when I was asked if I wanted to come back and teach, it was like, absolutely. Like anything to give back to that school that was such a great thing for me was very exciting to me. So it was more of a giving back to the school and to the industry for me rather than any kind of thing for me. Yeah, I got a lot out of it in that it's very rewarding and it's fun spending time with younger people and stuff. Although I wasn't that much older because I was a few years after graduating and then I taught there for 10 years. So it wasn't like I was in my 50s and 60s and they were 19, 20 kind of thing. I was at the beginning, I was only a few years older than them, so I could really relate to them, and it was fun. It was great, and I got to be there during the time that OCAD doubled, tripled its size and built the big box in the sky, and then changed from a college to a university, and so it was also an exciting time for the school too.
Did any of the students recognize that you're just a couple of years older, or did they not even notice that?
I don't remember having any kind of conversation about that.
Oh, that's good.
But I
That's
remember
good.
feeling like they were just colleagues rather than a teacher student relationship. But it was also like that when I was a student there. I think that may have changed somewhat now in that because it's a university and there's people you have to have your PhD and or the highest level of education. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, masters. Yeah.
So that I think that the teachers are probably more separated in age and experience than they are now. But it was very much a collaboration and a sharing kind of a environment. It was great. Yeah.
Huh, that's really good. Yeah. What was it like being honored by the Toronto Design Exchange? Can you describe how the type culture exhibition came about? How did your work influence Canadian typography? Did you design a recognized font?
I didn't design a font, no, but that show was amazing for many reasons. One it was just a few years after I graduated, maybe 3-4 years, and it was the first time that my work had been shown in any kind of a public sort of space like that, and I was being shown alongside of some of my very favorite profs from OCAD. Some of these guys that were like my heroes that I really, really looked up to, and my work was sort of presented alongside of theirs. So that was super exciting. The work that they picked, it was actually a collection of snowboard designs that I had done for a Canadian manufacturer. And I think what the curators were trying to do was sort of put together a snapshot of what Canadian design looks like at this moment, both aesthetically and how people are approaching graphic design and what sort of influences we're all drawing from. They picked my piece, I think, because it was it was very much an exploration. So the project, I was hired by this company. This sounds crazy, but at that time, snowboarding was just a brand new sport. It's become such a big thing that you would never know. But it was there was Burton Snowboards had invented the first snowboard, and then it just started to catch on. But still at this time, a lot of the ski resorts and stuff, you weren't allowed to snowboard, or if you were, there was only one hill or one lift that you could use, and so it was just very, very much at the beginning. And this company decided they were going to manufacture snowboards, but they had no idea what that meant and what the boards could look like and what kind of graphics would be on there and who might use the boards and stuff. So they hired me to sort of give a visual explanation of what the boards could be. So it was like this massive project of, okay, if a woman's going to use it, this is maybe what it would look like. If it's a kid, maybe it'd be like this. And if it's a man, a young man, old man. So we just kind of went down this path and explored what kind of visuals and what kind of graphics and elements would speak to these different demographics and colors and typography and images. And so it was a super great project. And the end project was incredible. And it was just lucky enough that somehow got picked to be in the show. So
yeah, it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
What was your product design company while you were teaching? Did you find they overlapped in concepts or content? And is this company still in operation today? And was it an invention of yours alone or a group project?
So when I was in my fourth year at OCAD, right at the end of the year, I started working for one of my professors who was the creative director at Irwin Toys here in Toronto. Sadly, they've now gone. But at the time, they were a really big company. They had all their toys and games and stuff that they'd made for quite a long time. It was I think they were the third or fourth generation of Irwins that were running it when I was there. So I was hired to be part of their design team, and I was responsible for designing their sports equipment. So they had two lines of baseball equipment and hockey equipment. So I was designing all of the gear, the way that it looked and worked and fit and feel, as well as the branding for the products, the packaging and the display. So right from very initial beginning of a product right through to how it's presented in a store, everything in between, which was great. That was exactly what I had learned in school, and it was amazing. So I worked there for 3-4 years. And then after that, I started my own small business. It was basically me and a team of freelancers that I had known. Many people were my colleagues from OCAD, and then also people that I'd met after working for a few years in the industry. I had a studio that I shared with some other freelancers. We had a nice space that we shared, and then we had a big wood shop where we could build prototypes and displays and all that kind of stuff. And then we also hosted sort of networking nights for creative people during that time. And then as far as how it related to what I was teaching, I was teaching a course that basically was about how to get an idea out of your head and have it come to be. So I had to teach them how to draw the idea, present the idea, make a prototype of it, and then do some little bit of branding. So it was an incredible reflection of exactly what I do, and I gave the kids just enough knowledge of every step of the way that they could then sort of take that and add to it as they needed to.
Wow, yeah, it seems like you were part of every step of the process, and you passed it on.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, yeah, it was good. I basically when I was given that course to teach, it's like, oh, okay, great, I can. This is what they're going to need. To me, it was like the most practical course that they were ever going to have. So I wanted to make sure I armed them with at least a basic knowledge of everything, a basic knowledge of how to do initial concept sketches, basic knowledge of how to present your idea to a client, basic knowledge of color, typography, graphic design. So we just scratched the surface of everything, but it was enough so that they could know what they needed to know, or they could either get some help from an expert, or give the beginning of an idea, or
and get them inspired to know more, I would
yeah,
think
yeah,
too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And we'll be right back. When you say you think of your work as internalized landscapes that reflect the experience of living in Canada, does that mean you have traveled across Canada? Or do you see these landscapes as urban cityscapes, more connected to cities and people rather than the vastness of our great outdoors up north?
Hmm. I have been lucky enough to travel from coast to coast. I haven't been to every single province, but I've been to most. Uh,
Oh, that's great.
but I haven't been far north. I haven't been really, really far north. I did go to Moose Factory once when I was a kid, but
Oh,
that's as
wow.
far north as I've been. But I have been to most places, especially the East Coast, for vacations and for work and stuff. But so when I said when I'm well, let me back up. As a Canadian, we're living with these many sort of interesting and contrasting ideas. Canadians are all very much huddled in large urban centers that are right along the southern border of Canada, right? And we tend to
Yeah.
be a real sort of urban nation, even though we think of ourselves as living in the wilderness. And whenever you go somewhere in the world, even when you go to the States, they think that we live outside and in nature and stuff, even though
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
we're living in cities and stuff. So I've always been really struck by that. And I think we always have this sort of backdrop of the nature, even though we live in large urban centers.
Hmm.
And then compounding that, we have the group of seven who have painted for us this idea of what good art is, and it's all about, the Canadian Shield and the wilderness and the mountains and stuff, and that's often when people, particularly non-artists, when they think of art or Canadian art, they think of something made by Tom Thompson or the group of seven. Um,
Yeah.
and that influence is
Yeah.
so strong that it's almost a battle to fight against it, right?
Hmm.
But what I try to do when I say I'm painting internalized landscapes is I try to paint the essence of a place. So I'm trying to reflect the surroundings. I'm trying to paint the idea of a tree or a structure without literally painting a rugged pine tree or a babbling brook, or even just a
Yeah.
concrete high rise. So I'm
Mhm.
trying to turn the lens around, instead of looking out and painting what you see. I turn the lens around and look inside and paint what I'm feeling inside, so that it captures the essence of the landscape. That's the idea.
Yeah, I'm like, what do I say to that? Yeah, I'm like, I can't think of
The mind
a
bender, yeah.
great response to that one. It's just like, wow.
Yeah. I wish that I could say I completely invented that idea. There's lots of other artists that work in that in that way, but it's I think about it a lot, and that's what I'm always trying to sort of work on.
Well, when you say, like, I think when you said the internalized landscapes, I think that is kind of like a trigger if people
Mm.
are like reading about your artwork, that may be a trigger for people that are understanding Canadian art, as you're saying, through the lens of the Group of Seven,
Yeah.
right? So that may just get them to take notice of how you're turning, like you said, turning the lens
Yeah.
around, and yeah, it's really cool. In your painting constructions, you use a range of materials like beeswax, spray paint, and a variety of printing techniques. How did this range come about? Was it an exploratory evolution, or did you come to them from copying contemporary artists that you admire?
Yeah, it's very much gathered sort of evolution. So I've been making art professionally for 30 years. I've been, making art my whole life, but professionally for 30. I graduated in 1992, so it's 31 years. And I've been working in encaustic for about 20 years now. And over those years, I've really sort of gathered lots of skills and techniques and experiences. And now what I try to do whenever I'm making a piece, whether it's a drawing or a collage, an encaustic painting, or one of my encaustic wall sculptures, I'm trying to combine as many of those experiences and skills together. So I'm sort of piling one on top of the other in a thoughtful way, trying to just sort of build on my life experiences, tell the story through those things. And one of the things I've really learned over the years, particularly working with the beeswax, is that beeswax has a really strong personality, and it tells you what it can and can't do and won't do. So you have to really be willing to let go of a certain amount of control and then collaborate with the medium. And I love that. A lot of artists can't stand it. The first time they try it, they're like, "Ugh, I can't," because they're used to working with acrylic paint or something where you most times you're sort of 100% in control. Whereas the beeswax doesn't relinquish the control like that. It always wants to be in charge. So as long as you're ready for that and accepting of that, then it's good. So I really love working within those parameters and then having this sort of dance of can and can't do, and then you end up with this magical solution that's better than the single thing. So by combining all of the tricks and tips that I've learned, along with the personality of the wax, you end up with a much better solution in the end.
When you said in your bio that your imagery resonates a childlike joy with an engineer's exactitude, does this stem from when you first fell in love with creating drawings and paintings as a child? Did you gain the exactness of an engineer from your education you learned? Is that right?
Yes and no. Yes, I definitely developed the sort of, as you call it, engineer's exactitude along the way. I think I've always had quite a mathematical brain, which you wouldn't think of as an artist, but I love working with a grid and making things exact or as precise as you can. But over the years, I've had some amazing teachers and mentors and stuff. But the best teacher that I ever had was my son when he was about 6 to 8 years old, and he would come to my studio quite often. Always on PD days or holidays and stuff. He'd come with me to my studio, and he loved making art with me right beside me on my little workbench and stuff. And watching a little kid make art it's like nothing else. They're so free and open and untouched. It's just magical. They're not worried about making mistakes or trying anything. They just do it, and they have this just pure creativity that
Yeah.
sadly it's literally like taught
Yeah,
right
I
out of
know.
us. And to see as he aged and got older and went into grade 1, and all of a sudden they have to color in the lines, and it's such a cliche, but it really is true. And it's because they're trying to
Yeah.
teach them how to write and have other skills that they need, but they literally hammer all of the beautiful creativity that we all have as a child. So what I like to do is try and remember that just pure idea of working with a kid and having that whimsy, and then but I still have,
Having
yeah,
that
yeah,
wonder.
and just the openness and excitement. They're always excited, right? No matter what it is, it could be the
Yeah.
most mundane thing, but they're just excited about it. So I'm always trying to sort of catch that, but then it's backed up by my sort of love of math and science and the exactness.
Yeah, like that's what I was thinking. They sound like opposites almost.
Hmm. Yeah, but then if you so the my folded monotypes, for example, is a great example of this. So the monotypes that I make are very, very loose and free and intuitive, where I'm just literally moving molten wax around on a hot plate, and then I put a piece of printmaking paper on top of that design that I've made, and it sucks it up, and you've got this then printed image on a piece of paper that's very, very loose and free, and it just has lots of scribbles and textures and lines on it. And then I take a structured grid, and I draw it up and score the paper and then fold it into a tessellated pattern. So you've got this mathematical pattern over top of that very loose, abstract design. It's a really interesting contrast to the two.
Yeah, it's like they do sound like quite opposites, but somehow you make them work together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you smash opposites together, often you get a really magical connection.
When you said in your bio that your imagery resonates a childlike joy with an engineer's exactitude, does this stem from when you first fell in love with creating drawings and paintings as a child? Or did you gain the exactness of an engineer from your education you learned? Is that right?
Well, I've been lucky enough to have some great professors and mentors over the years, but the best teacher I've had during my sort of art journey was my young son when he was about 6 to 8 years old. And he used to come to my studio on PD days and all the time, stuff like that. And making art with him was incredible. Children they're so free and they're open and unafraid. And unfortunately, we kind of lose that as we
Yeah.
go through school. They literally teach it out of us. And I tend to have a very sort of mathematical mind, partly, I guess, because I studied design and industrial design, and I've learned lots of very sort of technical skills. And I love gathering all those skills and putting them together into my work. But I always try to do it and remember that sort of childish whimsy that kids have. So when I say that it's trying to portray the child, or that a child whimsy is coming through, I'm trying to have that energy and excitement and innocence always shining through, even if there is sort of a calculated, finished piece.
Sort of like capturing the wonder of.
Yeah, yeah. It's just so incredible working with kids, and like you say, the wonder, the just it's just a pure creativity, that we slowly get chiseled
Yeah.
away, and schools don't mean to do it. They're teaching
Yeah.
us, how to hold a pencil properly so that we can print and write properly and read and stuff. But you just as we learn more and more and more, this innocence and excitement that we had slowly dissolves. And I think it was Picasso that said it took him 70 years to paint like he could when he was 7. 60 years like when he was 6. I forget what the exact quote was, but it takes a lifetime to sort of get back to that innocence, which I think we all have in there. It's just been forgotten and buried.
But it's good to
Yeah.
be able to find it again, right? When you can, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
In your bio, you say your paintings result in a thin sculpture of long forgotten messages. Are these messages from your consciousness or more like the consciousness of Canada or the globe? In keeping with the current climate crisis, would you say they are an unfolding of our natural potential?
Yeah, the idea is more like I'm telling a story through the layers that I've been piling up. So encaustic painting, you work in layers, sort of like you would with watercolor, but they build up and pile on top of one another. And each layer has its own message and its own history in there. And as you're covering it with the encaustic medium, some parts are more transparent, some parts are more opaque. And as you're building and building, the history shows through both literally and figuratively, where because the wax is piled on top of another layer, even if it's an opaque state, you can still see the previous layers behind. So when I'm actually building the piece and when you're finished, what you end up with is quite a thin sort of sculpture that hangs on your wall. And the history is coming shining through in those layers. And it's very much like this sculpture that has its own story that is telling you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds quite interesting.
Yeah.
To think of those layers and how they talk to each other and how you see them through each other. And
Yeah. It's something that's particularly prevalent in the encaustic medium because the layers are so defined. You can melt them together, and I often scrape into the previous layers, and you can add and subtract. And like I say, you can work in a opaque or translucent way, so you can see the layers in many different ways. But it's something that's very specific to the encaustic painting, more so than most of the other painting mediums.
Because your painting is so steeped in industrial design, has this in any way swayed your taste in music? For example, have you mirrored your love of industrial design into the music you enjoy also being industrial?
Yeah, industrial design is sort of a funny title
Yeah.
for product design, three-dimensional design. And I do love having music in my studio all the time when I'm there. I can't stand it if there isn't some kind of music playing, but it tends to be more in the background, and it's usually classical type music. I find that the most soothing and the most inspiring. I've been told many times that my work has a sort of a lyrical feel to it, and it's probably because the music is always there, and I often find myself kind of swaying and moving with the music, and I'm sure that comes through as I'm working on the pieces. But no, not a huge fan of industrial music. No, it's quite different from the work that I make. Yeah.
No, they don't really work together, do
Yeah,
they?
yeah. Yeah, I don't know how industrial design. I don't know. It makes you think that you're designing tractors or industrial equipment or something, but industrial design encompasses everything in our day-to-day life. From the moment you wake up, your toothbrush has been designed by an industrial designer. The car that you drive, all of the doorknobs in your house have been designed by an industrial designer. So it's the design of everyday things. Yeah.
Working with encaustics, where you build your artwork, have you considered delving into the architecture field? Is there a way to branch out into that discipline, or are the heavy years of mastery more of a deterrent?
I mean, I would love to. I love all things about architecture. I know many architects, and I admire the work that they do. And my work, especially lately over the last few years, really evokes a kind of architectural feel. I love working with light and space, and so I mean, it seems like a very kind of easy connection. I recently saw the documentary on an artist named Robert Irwin at Hot Docs, and I was familiar with his work, but I didn't know that much about it. And it's an amazing movie that they've put together. He's recently passed away, sadly, but he is an artist whose work is really a mix between architecture and fine art, and it's incredible to see how he uses architecture as his sort of painting palette, where he just has he builds these incredible immersive spaces using architecture and building materials and light, and it's incredible. I mean, the opportunity to do projects like that would be incredible. They're hard to come by, but it's something that I would love to do. Absolutely.
Yeah, architecture really is fascinating. Yeah. And we'll be right back.
Yeah, it is. And it's one of those things that can be done so mundanely, strip malls and horrible things like that. But it can also be so beautifully, artistically done. And I don't think it gets enough appreciation. Yeah.
Your artwork, when shared socially, has a distinct articulation that is almost poetic. Have you considered writing as a career option, or is it merely a subject in school you were good at that you never thought to take any further?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that very much, but again, it couldn't be further from the truth for me. Actually, quite the opposite. I've struggled with some learning disabilities for my whole life, particularly when I was in primary school and stuff like that. I'm a desperately slow reader, and it takes all of my strength and courage to just write the simplest things. I have to sort of overcome almost crippling anxiety just to write a simple greeting on a birthday card or something. So the thought of being a writer, I don't know. But I will say that social media does get a kind of it's often associated with a really sort of negative feeling, but it in many ways has allowed me to read much more than I have in the past, and also encourages me to write more and think about writing. So I appreciate what you said, and I do really work hard at all of my posts and all of the things that I write about my work and everything. But yeah, so it's amazing that he's yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it just comes across that way. It really does. It's like, because you can tell that with artists how much
Yeah.
effort they put into their sort of their bios and their statements that it surrounds their work. Like you can see it pretty plainly, and it just seems like you have put so much effort
Yeah, well, I think you're
and just an awareness in your work that you're able to
right.
write about it, and I just really found it
I
different
mean,
than what I've seen in the past. That's all.
you're so immersed in it, right? You're thinking about it constantly. It's one of those occupations where you never get to sort of park the truck and walk away from the job. You're always thinking about it, no matter where you are, what you're doing. If you're doing something completely different from making your art, you're still thinking about it, or you're being inspired by what's happening around you. So I do. I'm always thinking about how I'm thinking about my art, and then trying to put that down on paper. It can be difficult, but I try to, or lately I've been trying to approach it as using the same kind of problem solving that I would with my visual art. I try and attack it through the same kind of process, and I'm glad to hear that it's working, because I appreciate that very much. It's funny, I never ever considered it, but the thought of trying to write some kind of a book or some kind of a record of my artistic journey or something would be an amazing feat. That's for sure. It'll be incredible to do. So
Yeah, it's another avenue you could explore, right? So
maybe I'll give it a try.
all right. Well, thank you so much, David, for being on the podcast. And
Yeah,
we'll
yeah.
touch base in the future and maybe do this again.
I'd love that. I'd love that. Thanks for your great questions. It was a real pleasure
Exactly.
to go through them and share what's banging around in my head.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're often, as an artist, you're kind of you spend a lot of time alone, in the studio. Just you're left with you and your thoughts, and you're trying to get things out of your head, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and you're jotting down notes, and there's so many random things flying around all the time. But it's nice to put stuff down and share what you're thinking about, for sure. That's great.
Exactly. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, David Brown, for being on the podcast.
It was my pleasure.
Okay, you too. Bye.
Take care.
Join me next time as I go down another rabbit hole with another creative professional on their insights, their inspirations, and their ingenuity.